Welcome to Front Office Bros. Today we're going to be talking about Dynasty tight end rankings with tiers. We'll be going through 28 tight ends, not including rookies. Reason being is because we believe that the rookies who get drafted, their landing spot and draft capital will matter greatly. So more to come there. Before we get started, we are a new channel, so if you like this content, we ask you to smash that like button so others can find this video as well. Joe, let's get to it.
Hike!
So there were 5 players who I thought were notable that I left off of the list. So those 5 players are Daniel Bellinger, Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, Tyler Conklin, and Austin Hooper. So starting off in tier 7, there'll be 7 tiers in this tight end group. The first guy I've got is tight end Cade Otton. Cade Otton was a rookie last year. We started seeing him get more involved in the Tampa Bay offense. We know how much Tom Brady likes tight ends. I actually thought about even leaving Cade Otton off this group because I think it was pretty underwhelming, his performance. And now Baker Mayfield going in there. We know that Baker Mayfield really didn't involve the likes of David Njoku when he was in Cleveland. So I have some concern that Cade Otton will really be a mainstay in that offense. But for now, due to his youth and due to the opportunity of being a starting tight end, I have him here in tier 7. Next, I got Hayden Hurst. Hayden Hurst just signed with the Carolina Panthers, former first-round pick who, has really been a bust. Hayden Hurst has really been kind of all over the place. Drafted in Baltimore, didn't really pan out. Traded to Atlanta, didn't pan out. And then he went to Cincinnati, kind of saw some signs of life from him and started to be productive. Now going to Carolina, this might be his best opportunity yet. Not to say that he could have maximized on those opportunities in his previous teams, but based on where he's at with his production now going in, you always say this, Joe, a rookie quarterback's best friend is a tight end, and Tommy Tremble and Ian Thomas have not been able to cut it for them. So I actually think he's going to have a decent role there in Carolina. So I got him in tier 7. Next, I got Jake Ferguson. A lot of people may not know who Jake Ferguson is, former rookie last year for the Dallas Cowboys. But if you didn't know who Dalton Schultz was, you probably didn't know who Jake Ferguson was. And the reason why I say that is because Dallas did a really good job developing Dalton Schultz, and Dalton Schultz did not become that way overnight. It took him, I want to say, 2 years before he actually truly developed, and that can't happen with tight ends. And so I think Ferguson now will be the starting tight end with Dallas, unless they draft one. This tight end class, Daniel Jeremiah has said this might be the best class in decades. So this list could change greatly, when it comes to the draft and where these prospects end up going. But for now, I got Ferguson there in tier 7. Next, I got Irv Smith. Irv Smith, formerly with the Minnesota Vikings, never was able to stay healthy. And I'm not really convinced that he will. He signed a 1-year prove deal with the Cincinnati Bengals, but it's just such a that's tantalizing opportunity for him going in that Joe Burrow offense, replacing Hayden Hurst, really no tight end to really compete with him on the roster, in my opinion. So for me, I think the opportunity is very great in Cincinnati. So I felt like I had to have him on this list. Then you got Isaiah Likely, former rookie last year. It was interesting. I didn't really know what to expect with him because they drafted Charlie Kolar, and they also have Mark Andrews, obviously, but you start to see how Likely is a really good player. He got dinged for his 40-yard dash time, and that's why one of the reasons why he fell in the draft. But he really performed really well, and I think that he's an up-and-coming tight end. Obviously, with Andrews being there, it really hinders his. I think he's got a ceiling. I'll put it that way, but I think it hinders his floor because of Andrews. That a lot of volume and targets are going to be taken away. But I like the prospects of Likely. And then lastly, you got Jelani Woods, who was drafted by the Indianapolis Colts last year. Big body tight end, huge frame. Question will be, Chris Ballard, the GM, was there, but now we've got a new head coach. And, will Jelani Woods be a focal point for that offense? Mo Alley Cox is. I don't know if he's still on the team, but he's definitely gotten older. So Woods has an opportunity to be that starting tight end. Question will be, will he fit Shane Steichen's offense? But I do like the potential there for Woods.
Yeah, for just from a profile and the potential realm, I like Jelani Woods the best of this tier here. He's a really big guy, kind of similar stature, especially in height to Moelle Cox, but his athleticism and speed, I really like him, and can't see a reason why Colts wouldn't figure out a way to get him the ball. It's not like they have an abundance of receivers either, so they got to be able to throw to somebody there. But yeah, this bottom tier really just shows you how murky the tight end scheme is if you don't have some of the top guys. We're talking about Jake Ferguson's of the world. Do you think he's going to be affected at all with like Peyton Hendershot as well, also in Dallas?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. Peyton Hendershot was an undrafted tight end that they brought on. Ferguson being a former fourth-round pick last year. So I give the edge to Ferguson. And we saw that Dalton Schultz was also a fourth-round pick when he came into the league. So Dallas has been able to develop tight ends. You saw even Jason Witten. He was a later round tight end as well. So for every reason, some teams just know how to develop talent. I've always said Pittsburgh is a wide receiver factory. You could argue in a way that, they've got like a development track there for tight ends for Dallas.
Yeah, they seem to. They really do seem to, because I mean, even before Schultz, like everyone was before the ACL injury, everyone was talking up Blake Jarwin and the potential of him even. So tight ends definitely, are a thing in Dallas, and they definitely seem to know how to develop them. But I am interested to see if Hayden Hurst couldn't do better in Carolina. As you mentioned, I always do say the tight end position is like a rookie security blanket. So I think he'll get utilized there. And as you mentioned as well, there's not really much competition at the tight end there in Carolina for him either.
So heading over to tier 6, I've got some veterans that I think are still going to be relevant. And then I've got some younger players that I believe haven't tapped into their potential just yet. But as a result, they're in tier 6. So the first guy I got on there is tight end Tyler Higbee. Higbee's an older guy. I want to say he might have his best season last year. Was heavily targeted in that Rams offense. And, that offense, it will be interesting. I mean, you've got Matthew Stafford, and who knows what's going on with him. And I think as a result, unfortunately for Higbee's sake, I kind of kept him lower as a result of all of the questions that I have as far as Stafford goes, because tight ends can play, older years, as we'll talk about later. Then you got Gerald Everett next. Gerald Everett really came on the scenes this year going with the Chargers. I think he's really been an afterthought before he came to the Chargers, and he performed really well. But the problem is that there's so many mouths to feed in that offense. He's not really a prominent guy in the role in that offense, and so that's why I have him at tier 6. Then the next guy I got is Juwan Johnson. I actually really like Juwan Johnson. I'm probably higher on him than most, but they just signed him to an extension. Tells you that they're invested in the player. Obviously, they have that Taysom Hill, makeshift tight end role, but I kind of wonder if Taysom Hill is going to start kind of being put to the side, because now you got Derek Carr as a starter. Last year they had that, quarterback carousel, or whatever you want to call it, roulette, with Jameis Winston and Andy Dalton and, Taysom Hill coming in. I think, in my opinion, Dennis Allen's on the hot seat, and he has familiarity with Derek Carr. I don't even see, maybe I could be wrong, maybe some red zone packages, but I think this is going to be Derek Carr's show. I don't think Taysom Hill is going to be involved. So I don't even know what role he'll have. But as we've seen, Derek Carr has targeted tight ends, obviously has helped Darren Waller become the player that he was. So I'm excited for Juwan Johnson. Then the next guy I got is Noah Fant. A real disappointment in Denver. Joe asked you have him hung up on your wall over there. But when it comes to Noah Fant, I was hoping for more from him. But Seattle, I can't remember a really prolific tight end in Seattle in quite some time. Gino really sparingly targeted him. I think when it comes to Fant, unless he goes to a different team, I'm just not that excited about him. Then I got Trey McBride. A lot of people were really excited about him. A lot of people thought that he was the best rookie as far as the tight end position last season. And he obviously didn't get on the field for a good amount of time because Zach Ertz was there. But then when Zach Ertz tore his ACL, that was his opportunity. I just am not convinced that he will really take over the reins in Arizona. So I have some concerns about him. That's why I have him in tier 6. And then lastly, I've got Dawson Knox. As a Bills fan, I really like Dawson Knox. He's a frustrating player at times because he makes some amazing grabs that you're like, how did you possibly catch that? But then he has some drops that are like, why? How did you drop that? And the other part of it is he's just not a vocal point of that offense. And I think that the Bills will end up drafting a receiver or somehow acquiring a receiver. And so as a result, now you're talking about Gabe Davis, another receiver, and Stephon Diggs, in my opinion, outpacing him in targets. So that's why I have Knox in tier 6.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. I always, I don't know why it is, but every time I watch a Bills game, it always seems like every time the Bills play at home, Dawson Knox scores a touchdown. But he is an interesting player and does make some nice catches. You mentioned Higbee in last year being his best season. It was his best season in terms of receptions, and it was also his second most yardage, highest yardage season totals with 620. But he did have 734 yards in 2019. But then he's had 5 touchdowns each of the last 2 seasons and only had 3 last year. But I do think he's an interesting player. Tier 6 is definitely fair because we don't really know what to expect out of the Rams landscape at quarterback. What's going on with Stafford, him not really being healthy. But I also agree with your placement of Juwan Johnson here. He's really an interesting player. A few years ago, I really liked Troutman, but he's really just been used as a blocking tight end, and Juwan Johnson has really emerged as a nice weapon for the Saints to use through the air.
Yeah, Troutman was definitely not one of your better payments, Joe, when it comes to our league. But what are you gonna do?
Yep. So you're gonna swing and miss sometimes. I was just glad that I was able to get rid of that contract.
So heading over to tier 5s, I think some people are going to be really surprised by the player I have in this group. The first guy I have. So last guy in tier 5 is tight end Mike Gesicki. I really like Mike Gesicki. I think there's way too much bias as far as him because there's recency bias based on last season. I know how bad he was in Miami, but he wasn't used in Miami. We have to remember that. When he was used before Mike McDaniel was there, he was around a tight end 1. So he's got the talent. He's very athletic. And you could argue, as far as a New England offense, you could argue that he could. I know I got flack from our friend Dustin, I think, on this, or some other people, but I think that he could be the number 1 option in that New England offense. They've got Juju, they've got Devontae Parker. I understand that, but to me, we know Bill Belichick loves the tight ends. He utilizes them quite extensively. He's still young. So I'm bullish on Gesicki. And if I strike out, I strike out. But I feel like it's one of those instances where you go up to the bat and you're either going to get a home run or you're going to strike out. And I feel this way about Gesicki, and I feel like you're going to get a home run, and that's why I have him here. The next guy I got is Cole Kmet. We had talked about this in a recent video that we did, Joe. And when it comes to Cole Kmet, my big concern with him is now you got DJ Moore in that offense, and you've got now you got a lot of mouths to feed there. And is he going to be as targeted as he has been? With Justin Fields, I just don't know if Justin Fields is going to have as many pass attempts. But it is a very I guess we don't know whether or not it's going to be a fantasy friendly offense for Kmet. I think it could be, and that's why I have him here, and he's young. So there's definitely some potential there for Kmet. And then the last guy I got in this tier is we love this guy, Joe, but it's Chigoziem Okonkwo. We talk about Chig Okonkwo. The guy's just an athletic, really athletic player. In Tennessee, there is no one to compete with him right now as far as targets are concerned. That offense really doesn't have a lot to it outside Treylon Burks and Derrick Henry. Really think he could take a next step. Really like Chig, and I think he's got a lot of potential.
Yeah, I like Chig Okonkwo a lot, or as I like to call him, is Chicky. But
Chiggy with it.
Yeah, I'm getting Chicky with it. I really like his potential as well. We saw some flashes last year. They really makes me excited for this season. So the only thing I don't agree with is I think I would have Komet in tier 6. I think
Okay.
I like the potential of Gesicki and Chiggy both better than Komet. So, I was going to say either Komet's just the one guy in tier 5 I don't really like. So I might move him down or move those guys up. I don't know which one. But like you, I'm really bullish on Gesicki as well. Not sure why, those other guys are potentially giving you flack for saying that Gesicki could be the top target. We've seen New England really utilize tight ends before and be prevalent. And I don't think Devontae Parker or Smith Schuster are, that great enough to warrant more of the passing attack than Gesicki. And those guys aren't really number one receivers either.
Yeah, so transitioning over to tier 4, I got 3 players in this tier. In this I could get a lot of people throwing tomatoes at me for this one. So I got tight end Zach Ertz. From some other rankings that I've seen, this guy is in the absolute cellar. And I understand he tore his ACL. And he's 32 years old. But we have to remember, tight ends can play longer in their careers. Zach Ertz has been one of the best tight ends that we've seen in past several years. So I understand towards the end. I mean, he's not Tony Gonzalez, but Tony Gonzalez played till he's 36 years old. Zach Ertz is 32. So to me, Zach Ertz still has a lot left to give. And I think he'll recover from this injury fine. And I think he's still going to be involved. I couldn't put him any lower. I mean, I thought about this one. I really did. And there are going to be people who disagree. We'll see. There's a lot of information we don't know. We'll see as we go into after the draft, as we get into training camp, we'll have a better idea of where Zach Ertz is. He's not a guy I would target. I have him there as a placeholder. I really would want more information. I don't think I have enough information, but for now, just based on how consistent he's been and how accomplished he's been as a tight end, just felt like he needed to be there. Then I got Greg Dulcich. I really like Greg Dulcich. I think he has a lot of potential. Wondered why he wasn't used in that Broncos offense earlier. The question for me is, how does he fit now in a Sean Payton offense? That's my concern. He wasn't there when he was drafted. So obviously Sean Payton had Jimmy Graham at one point. Now he's no Jimmy Graham. But, he has history of using the tight end in his offensive game plan and system. So time will tell with Greg Dulcich, but I like the potential. I'm going to put him in tier 4. Then my last guy in tier 4, best guy in this tier, is Dalton Schultz. Now, people are going to be lower on him because he went to Houston. He's no longer in Dallas. And I think that's credible. But if the Houston Texans draft a rookie quarterback, which now all the buzz is that they're not going to take 1 and 2, which will be, I guess the Texans being the Texans, I guess. But to me, he has an opportunity to be possibly the number one option in that offense. Brandon Cooks is no longer there. I think their best receiver at this point is Nico Collins and maybe Robert Woods. Running backs, you've got Damian Pierce and Devin Singletary. So I think he could get a lot of targets. So for me, I think we'll see what happens with Schultz, but I think he could be a vocal point in that offense. That's why I have him in this tier.
Yeah, this tier is definitely interesting. I think most people don't have Zach Ertz as high as you is because everyone's ready for the Trey McBride experience and for him to just take over there in Arizona being the number one tight end. But, I think it's fair to have Zach Ertz as the placeholder there. People tend to forget, at least he was like he was at least, he was playing at a high level before he got injured. I think he might have even been like top 5 prior to that injury. He was having a really good season. I think people tend to forget about that. So I think it's fair to keep the placeholder there, in order to see if he's going to be able to keep that role, what his health is or is McBride, are we fully ready for the McBride experience? And I think it's fair for you to wait for more information there. Now, the Greg Dulcich one is really interesting because I'm wondering how much of a fit Greg Dulcich is going to be for this offense because everything I'm reading lately around Denver is how much they're really looking into this tight end class. And, they've had Dalton Kincaid in for a visit and talked to a lot of other tight ends. So it'll be really interesting to see if Peyton decides and George Payton decide to go after another tight end and bring one in. But I also agree with you. I like Dalton Schultz. I think this is a fair spot for him just because we're not really sure what kind of production he's going to get in Houston. But I think he's going to still, garner some targets there and should be able to have a pretty good year there.
But with the Broncos, they don't have a first or second round pick. So if they're visiting with guys like Kincaid, that probably means that they're going to acquire a pick somehow, most likely via Judy or Sutton, probably.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the Ravens, before they got OBJ, I guess they had a deal in place with the Broncos for Cortland Sutton, but then the Broncos backed out of the deal. So I don't know what's going on
that's
there.
the first time I heard this.
Oh, that's the first time you heard it? Well,
yeah.
That's everything I've been reading the last couple of days over on Twitter is, especially last night I saw Broncos backed out of a deal. I guess they had a deal in place with the Ravens for Cortland Sutton to be a Baltimore Raven.
Wow. That would have been something else. So transitioning over to tier 3, I got 2 guys in this group. So these guys are respectively my 10th and 9th players as far as my tight ends. So the 10th guy in tier 3, so second in tier 3, is tight end Evan Ingram. Really like what Evan Ingram did last year. He was a disappointment in New York, and I thought he was a disappointment. Guy couldn't catch. But now going over to Jacksonville, he during the later, and you have him in Dynasty, so you noticed this. But during that later half of the season, man, this guy was on fire. So I think this is a great offense for him. We know that Doug Peterson likes to feature the tight end. And now you've got that rapport building between him and Lawrence. Question will be, how does his value get affected with Ridley in that offense? Where do the targets go? Because nobody's vacated. So other than Marvin Jones, but I don't really consider him that much was a prominent option in that offense. So time will tell there, but really like Evan Ingram. And then the other guy I got in this tier is Darren Waller. I really like Darren Waller going to New York. I think it's a good change of scenery for him. Didn't really like the idea of him being there with McDaniels, and I just for whatever reason, it's just a weird situation. They extend Darren Waller. I expected them to use him. Wasn't able to stay healthy. So it looks like McDaniels got frustrated and said, "See you later." So him going to New York. I mean, right now that wide receiver landscape is an absolute wasteland. So Darren Waller has the opportunity to be the number 1 target in that offense. Question will be, will Daniel Jones get him the ball, and will Dable really feature him in the offense? But to me, he's a little bit on the older side, but like the opportunity there in New York.
Yeah, I definitely like Darren Waller's fit better in New York than Las Vegas, and what he had done there. It just didn't seem like he fit what McDaniels was trying to do, and that's ultimately probably what got him out the door, because McDaniels has really this offseason brought in more guys that fits what he likes to do offensively. So we saw Daniel Bellinger, have a pretty good year last year in New York at the tight end position. And, obviously Waller's a much better tight end than he is. So, and like you said, the wide receivers aren't polarizing in New York. He definitely has an opportunity, to be the number 1 target there. And it'll be interesting to see how he does with Daniel Jones and how often he gets targeted there. But Evan Ingram, I'm excited to see what he's going to do with his second year with Trevor Lawrence and Peterson. It's definitely fair. What the target share is going to be with Calvin Ridley coming over now, and what kind of passing volume to expect. But man, he just was on such a heater the second half of the season there, and Lawrence really seemed to look to him and get him the ball.
So transitioning over to tier 2, I got 4 guys in this group. The first guy I'm going to talk about is Pat Freiermuth. Muth, he's a great player. I targeted him in the draft in his rookie in our home dynasty league because I really like the potential of him in Pittsburgh. I think I'm down on Deontay, but in general, I mean, I don't think there are too many mouths to feed in that offense. You've got Pickens. You've got Deontay, and then we'll see. Do they draft a receiver to bring someone else into that room? They have Calvin Austin, who missed the whole season? Does he start to, have a role in that offense? But overall, Freiermuth is young, super young. And as a result, I think he's been involved in that offense enough that I like his potential. I think him and Pickett should grow in their rapport moving forward. Then my next guy, now this is tough because these two guys I was flip-flopping between, but just based on preference, I went with Dallas Goedert next. Dallas Goedert, great player in Philadelphia. Not really too much, honestly, I could really add in that. I think he's been a big role in that team. He's got guys like A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, who I think were a little bit more relied upon than him, so maybe not as much of a vocal point in the offense. But it's hard not to like Goddard. He should continue to be good for years to come. Then the next guy I got is David Njoku. I am much higher on David Njoku than probably most, but for me, when it comes to Njoku, it's just the athleticism. To me, he has that ability to. I think his ceiling is higher for me. And with, we'll see Deshaun Watson, you started to see Deshaun Watson target Njoku more this season. People thought he was a bust, really, until just recently. So I don't know. I guess I'm like Cleveland in this way, that I'm enamored with the athleticism. And sometimes you see that teams, they get just, suctioned on to, oh, I really like this athleticism, I got to have this guy. Sometimes it doesn't pan out. I think we're starting to see Njoku bud, into a nice flower. So we'll have to see when it comes with Njoku. And the first guy I got in this tier is George Kittle. I've had a love-hate relationship with George Kittle. At times, I really felt he's overrated, but because I think he's a very good tight end as a blocker. He's also a good receiver, but I think a lot of times he's a better tight end in real life than he is a fantasy tight end. And that's what I think people end up confusing. But I will say this. When Brock Purdy became the quarterback, George Kittle took off. George Kittle was phenomenal when Brock Purdy was the quarterback. And if it's so true that Brock Purdy will be most likely the quarterback for the 49ers moving forward, I really like that for Kittle. If it's not, then sometimes I feel like he was kind of a phantom. He gets disappeared from the game. That's the only thing I have against Kittle, but Kittle's been a top tight end now for years. It's hard to not put him. I don't think he's tier 1 though.
Yeah, I think it's fair, your placement of Kittle at tier 2. He is kind of he's been a boomer bust player. He'll have those great games where he's just plowing everyone over and getting a couple touchdowns, and then he'll kind of go to another game where he'll have like 3 catches for like 40 yards, and you're like, well, wait, what's going on here? That's not the same Kittle I saw last week, after 2 touchdowns. But I definitely like him better with Brock Purdy. And, I just like George Kittle, as a person, as a player, really respect his game. But I think, people watching that, and he's such a polarizing guy when you do watch him on the field. And I think that kind of does cloud people's judgment, with the fantasy, just because he's such a great player, but doesn't always produce on that side of the fantasy. So I think you are onto something there, and why your tier 2 placement for him is fair. I'm excited about Pat Freiermuth as well. I think he could really continue to grow, especially in his role there and with Pickett. And if he really makes the leaps that everyone expects, Freiermuth should definitely become a bigger part of that offense and really be better for fantasy and become one of the top tight ends for fantasy. And as you mentioned, it's hard not to have Goddard there. He's just such a solid tight end and a guy that really excels at getting the yards after catch as well and getting those big plays. And he's in a great spot with that Eagles offense. So, I like him there. And I agree with you. People might be down on Njoku just because of his past, but we did see something last year with him and Watson. And I've always, you've always been really high on him. I'm starting to come around on him, realizing his potential, and he is just so athletic. And I think I'm excited to see what he definitely grows into this year with Watson, as you mentioned.
So going over to my final tier, tier 1, I got 4 players, and I got a little bit of a surprise that maybe some will disagree with me on. But the first guy I got in this tier, believe it or not, is tight end Mark Andrews. Andrews has been a staple, I think, one of the best tight ends here for the past few years, has a great connection with Lamar Jackson. I think I mean, the saga continues, but I think Lamar will end up staying in Baltimore, and so I think his value will stay. So that's why I got Andrews. But the reason why I've got this next guy ahead of him is because I'm really excited for his future, and that's TJ Hawkinson. TJ Hawkinson, when he was traded to the Minnesota Vikings, this guy was getting targeted all the time from Kirk Cousins. I mean, he really started getting heavily utilized. And so I have nothing against Andrews. I just think that Hawkinson, we started seeing something with Hawkinson, and I think Hawkinson is on the rise. And that's why, to me, I think we've seen what Andrews is, and Andrews is great. But I think that's we've seen the most from him. I think Hawkinson's on the rise. I think we could see even more from him. And that's why I have him number 3 here in tier 1. Next guy I got is Travis Kelce. You know, the one knock you'd have on him is age, but man, this guy, he's aging like a fine wine. I don't know what to say. I mean, he just continues to perform well. I don't understand it. You know, the way he's able to have separation, it just boggles my mind. I just do not understand why this guy is always so wide open. And I'm sure you probably wonder the same as a Broncos fan. But when it comes to Kelce, I mean, he's a model of consistency. There is such a huge gap between him and the next tight end. It's just outrageous. I just don't know how long he's going to play for. That's the only question. But to me, you got to have him in this tier 1. And then the number 1 guy, which I don't think is controversial. I know in some videos we did last year, we had some people be like, are you out of your mind when it comes to Kyle Pitts? We even talked about, you know, whether you could trade Kyle Pitts for Travis Kelce straight up last year. But okay, I let the cat out of the bag. Kyle Pitts is my number 1 tight end. Hard not to. I mean, the profile of him as a tight end is just, I don't know. The problem is Arthur Smith. Once Arthur Smith is gone, after next year, Kyle Pitts is going to take off, and he's going to be the guy we expect. But I can't overlook the potential. I'm looking at your face right now. It's looking like you're disagreeing with me on Pitts.
Yeah, I don't know how you have Kyle Pitts over Travis Kelce. You know, I get the longevity thing, but I guess my look of confusion on my face was why you think Arthur Smith is holding him back and why you think Arthur Smith is the reason he's not doing well.
Because he's not making him a vocal point in the offense. He was having Pruitt getting more targets than him. I mean, it was just a nightmare. I don't know how do you not, a guy that talented, how do you not find ways to get him the ball?
I mean, I get that Kyle Pitts is like, you know, uber athletic and everyone's just so enamored with his speed and he's like a wide receiver playing tight end, but we still haven't really seen anything out of him from like a real production level with any sort of consistency either. So I don't know. I'm just wondering if he's becoming a little too overrated at the tight end position here. And I don't know. We really haven't. I haven't seen it to necessarily believe it yet. You know, everyone talks about him, and then he was injured last season. So, you know, I don't know. That's why Kelce's got to be the number 1 guy. I get that we're not sure how long he's going to play, but you even said it. There's a gap between him and every other tight end, even Kyle Pitts. You know, if Kyle Pitts was on, I don't know if Arthur Smith is necessarily the guy to be holding him back. You know, it could just be that they don't really have a quarterback there in Atlanta either. And I'm not sure, you know, Ritter is the answer, but, you know, a change of scenery probably would help for Pitts. But at the moment, you know, he's an Atlanta Falcon and, you know, it is what it is.
I hear what you're saying. And I think it's a fair critique. And I don't think it's unreasonable what you're saying. I guess in my mind, would I rather have 2 to 3 years of Kelce or 10 plus years of Pitts? And I think that's why for me, from a dynasty context, especially in traditional dynasty, right, in that format, that's why I have, in my mind, based on the talent that Pitts is, I have to put Pitts ahead of Kelce because you're talking 10 plus years of Pitts versus a 2 to 3 years for Kelce.
10 plus years, you hope, anyways. But yeah, I get your point. It's a fair point. And, you know, we'll see what the years to come for Kyle Pitts will be. for TJ Hawkinson, it's interesting you have him at 3. I always have liked TJ Hawkinson. I always question why the Detroit Lions didn't target this guy more or utilize him more in their offense. But curious what you think. Do you think, Kirk Cousins, he was great with them for this past year. Kirk Cousins probably just this season with the Vikings. Are you concerned about Hawkinson after Kirk Cousins leaves and they potentially draft a quarterback this year and what he's like moving forward after Kirk Cousins?
Yeah, I mean, it is possibly concerning. I think it's a fair point. But you can make the same critique if with Lamar Jackson's not there, is someone going to target Mark Andrews in the same way, whoever that quarterback's going to be? So I hear what you're saying. I just think that there was a reason why the Minnesota Vikings traded for TJ Hawkinson. That was Kevin O'Connell and the Minnesota Vikings GM decision to go get Hawkinson. So to me, it tells me that they're going to use him and they're going to be a part of their game plan. I mean, it was really him and Jefferson, really, near the end there. And we got to remember, Thielen's not there anymore. So I don't think Osborne, I actually think if you want to look at it this way, I think Hawkinson could even have an even larger role. It's not that Osborne would take up Thielen. I think all those touchdowns that Thielen got, I could see a lot of those touchdowns transferring over to Hawkinson. As you saw, he had a ton of red zone targets by Kirk Cousins. We'll see what happens. I agree. I don't think Kirk Cousins is the future there. New quarterback, that's the concern, right? I mean, no player is spotless. There could be things that you could look at to say, this could happen, that could happen. So, I mean, you bring up a fair point, and it could definitely affect him down the road.
Yeah, but with that said, though, I do love him for this upcoming season, and don't see any reason for him to, really slow down or, not do what he was doing at the end of last season after the trade.
Would you put him above Andrews like me?
Yeah, I think that's fair because I did agree with your point. I think we have seen like the best from Mark Andrews already. And the more and more this Lamar Jackson saga continues, I'm not so sure he is the quarterback for the Ravens this upcoming season. I think at some point push comes to shove. Maybe the Ravens just say, look, Lamar, you've been playing these antics. We got to come up with another plan. And who's to say they don't draft somebody in this draft class here or just go another direction?
Yeah, it would be very interesting if you had a guy like Anthony Richardson on the board. And do they take a guy like Anthony Richardson, reset the clock, and then move off of Lamar? It'd be fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, you got to, I heard Orlovsky make a good point this morning on ESPN. You got to understand that their new offensive coordinator come from Georgia. He was a part of the recruiting process of all these young quarterbacks and these rookies that are coming into the draft this year. So he's going to know them pretty well and in depth, and maybe he has a little bit of say if they do decide to go that route.
So that concludes our tight end dynasty rankings with tiers. If you enjoyed this content, we ask you to please like this video so others can find it. Comment below on your reaction to our dynasty tight end rankings with tiers. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we recently joined Spotify and Apple Podcasts, so you can listen to us there as well. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time.